Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to bring on to the Goldstein on Gelt show best-selling author Phil Parker. He's the designer of the lightning process, and he talks to people about, well, let's say, improving their psychology in many areas. Phil, a real pleasure to have you.
Hi, Doug. Great to be here.
So one of the stories that you tell is about some of the work you did with a trader, that's with a D, not a traitor, and how he had a little bit of a problem when his nerves got the best of him, and it really kind of messed him up. But you were able to help him walk through it and actually fix that. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, with traders who are successful, to survive in the market, you have to have a decent strategy, and there's lots of good examples of strategies where you fundamentally look for trends and you only trade if it meets your criteria for this looks like something I can make some money on. And what happens with people who run those kind of strategies, they become very successful. Obviously, the way you make it, you have a small margin of profit, and you have to trade quite large amounts to make the margin work. So what would happen is he'd sit there, he'd be looking at his computer screens and be waiting for something he thought was a good, safe, decent trade. And sometimes there'd be like a day, 2 days, 3 days where nothing showed up. And then he started to worry, well, have I lost my touch? Am I not doing this right? Will I ever make any money again? And then what he'd do, he'd start to get a bit bored, a bit tense. His nerves would get the better of him. And then he'd trade on things that were outside of his normal criteria, like, well, that might come good, he'd stray from his very successful criteria for trading. What would happen then was sometimes those gambles, which is what they are at that point, would come off, but more often than not they wouldn't. And so he'd be looking at his P&L at the end of the day, kind of going, oh my God, I've put all this money in. What am I going to do tomorrow? And so tomorrow he'd approach tomorrow with this huge loss, and instead of going back to his tried system of checking for the proper things that are good signs of a good trade, he would chase the loss by making more and more rash decisions, which of course obviously ended up with making and it's like a classic gambling thing. You try and recover by making
good money after bad, right?
Yeah, and making more and more. Well, if that comes in at 50 to 1, it's worth it. If it comes in at 200 to 1, oh, yeah. So you start to stretch your criteria for what are successful interventions. And in the end, what he found was he started to notice that in these moments, this is where it all went wrong. If he stuck to his real trading, his decent trading strategy, he'd be fine. He made very good money. And that's what he came to me with. He said, look, I'm a really good trader, but I notice sometimes I just flip out for these. We worked out what the reasons were, because he wasn't sure what was happening. He just went, I just don't get it. I'm a good trader, and some weeks I do dreadfully, and I don't know what it is. And we unpacked it and unpicked it. And I've talked to other traders since, and it's a very, very common phenomenon that people, either when they're stressed or feeling lucky, or they stray away from what they know works, because the rewards look huge if you kind of take a gamble on something. But when it doesn't pay off, they start to then spin into this, trying to recover the loss. So what we taught him to do is how, in those moments when he felt like, oh, I'm going to have a go with this, nothing's come along for a while, I'm going to have a punt, I'm going to take a shot on this, we'd teach him how to not do that, how to interrupt those very, very compelling pathways and instead make better, reasonable decisions, which takes a bit of nerve, because if you haven't, say, traded for 3 days, being able to go, there's nothing worth trading on, I'm going home, rather than sitting there and waiting for something or jumping in. It takes the nerve, but that is the nerve you need. That's the state you need to be in if you want to make long-lasting changes in these kind of markets.
Okay, so tell us, how can someone develop that nerve? Because it's not only professional traders that have this. I've seen it in my day job. My day job is that I'm an investment advisor. I do financial planning and investment services for people who are just handling their own portfolios, and they just want the help of someone to kind of coach them through it. But it is true that sometimes they'll feel, more often than not, I think it comes from reading the news, and there's some panicky bit of news. Oh my God! And they think like they freeze, literally like a deer in the headlights. So
yeah.
What do you do to help people?
Well, first of all, it's a very interesting thing you point out, which is, it's not just traders, it's pretty much everyone. And not just in the financial markets, but everywhere we respond in these kind of ways. And the financial markets are particularly interesting, of course, because if enough people start to run scared, you actually shift the market itself because people start selling or buying or trading. And so it becomes this massive spiral of, and certainly with, the crashes that happened a few years ago, you could see a lot of that going on. So as you say, what do we do about it? Well, luckily I've written a book all about this called Get the Life You Love, which is how to sort this out. But very briefly, the first thing, which I'll tell you is a major part of the book, is I've had to invent a new verb, which I don't know if you've heard about. It's called the do, D-U with a circumflex. It's different in different languages. In fact, you may be able to help me come up with a Hebrew word for it. So we haven't got one of those. We've got German, French, Norwegian, Scandinavian, and Spanish, and Italian as well. So the do is a very interesting thing. It's basically saying very often we find ourselves in a situation where we're responding not in a very useful or health-giving way. So a good example would be people would say, I'm really stressed about the world economy. And what they're saying here is that their stress is caused by this external thing, the world economy, that they can't directly change or influence. As a result of that, they're saying the world economy causes me stress, and therefore, until the world economy changes, I am destined to be stressed because that's what's causing it for me. But if we step back for a minute, we can see it's not quite accurate. The world economy doesn't cause us stress. What causes us stress is us, our response to the world economy. And so we ask people to use this word, the do, D-U, which says, instead of saying the world economy is causing me stress, what you should say is put a do in it and say, I am doing stress about the world economy. Now, the do says you're not doing it on purpose. That's why it's a you rather than O. It's an unconscious response, but it is you that's creating it. Because we know lots of people in the world aren't that bothered about the world economy. A lot of people are, but a lot of people just don't think about it.
And it doesn't help to get worried about it.
Well, exactly. It doesn't make any difference apart from it makes you more stressed and more likely to make rash and unhelpful decisions. So what the do does is really fascinating, is it really highlights your role in it. So if you just practice this at home, if you're listening, or if you want to do it, Doug, instead of saying I am stressed about the world economy, say that, I am stressed about the world economy. If you change it to I am doing stress about the world economy.
I am doing stress about the world economy.
You notice it gives you this kind of perceptual gap, this pause. We go, hold on a minute. If I'm doing stress about it, rather than I am stressed, if I'm doing it, if I'm actually involved in it, then the only thing that has to change is not the world economy. What has to change is me, which is the only thing, of course, we really have any genuine control over. We all try, don't we, to change the weather, especially if you live in England. You go, if only the weather was better today because I'm having a barbecue. It's so unfair.
Just don't have barbecues. That's probably the answer for y'all in London. Yeah.
Or people will say, I went on holiday, but, the noise of the construction site next to the hotel ruined my holiday. Well, it didn't actually. It didn't help, sure. But what ruined your holiday was how stressed you got about that, how much we invest into. Because if you go on holiday and there's a construction site next to your hotel and you can't change your hotel, then the only thing you're left to change is how you deal with it. Yeah. And there'll be some people in that situation who don't deal with it well, and there'll be other people who just find a way to get over it and get on with it. And the do is the secret to that. So that's the very, very first thing, is really to recognize which bits you can change and which bits you can't change.
Very interesting. Yeah. We were talking with Phil Parker. He's a best-selling author. He is the designer of something called the Lightning Process, and we've been talking about how people deal with difficult situations. Phil, I'll tell you, one of the things that I'm working on now, I just recently wrote a book with world chess champion Susan Polgar. It's called Rich as a King, and it's about how the strategies of chess can help you actually to invest better. And I had many opportunities to talk with Susan as we were writing the book. And one of the things that she pointed out, as you may be able to imagine, this sort of tournament chess world is incredibly stressful because you are, it's just you, right? You're all by yourself at the table, and your opponent's trying to kill you. So it's really a huge amount of stress. But the trick is, and what you see with a lot of the great players is, they don't break a sweat. And one of the things that she pointed out is because she plans a great deal in advance about what she's going to do, what her overall strategy is going to be in the game. Now, it's true the tactics, the day-to-day decisions, or the moment-to-moment decisions, she may be coming up with on the spot, but she already knows the big direction of what she's trying to do. Does that make sense to you in sort of the types of work you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the secret is, and it's linked to what you say and the do, is the most important asset you can possibly have in any field you're in is the state of mind that you choose to be in that moment. So with her, she's got a whole range of tactical strategies, but what's most important is she has a knowing that whatever comes up, she'll be able to think her way through. So the preparation is important, but it's mainly that when she sits at the chessboard, for her, it's not a crisis. It's, this is very interesting. I wonder what's going to come and how can I deal with it. I dealt with a similar thing. I worked with a guy who's on the European golf tour, the big thing in Europe, where millions are won and lost. It's absolutely incredible how much money that is.
One stroke, right?
Well, exactly. I mean, and if you talk to those golf guys, that's not how they're thinking. They can't afford to think that way. Like, if I don't hit this right, I'm going to lose 6 million, or I'm going to win 6 million. You just can't afford to think that way, because if you do, then of course you won't be in the right state of mind. You have to be. And in fact, very often they play better when there's no money on the table, because there's just no pressure, or they're not doing stress about it. And what you have to do in order to work at that level, and it's slightly more complex than chess. With chess, you're playing an opponent and there's strategies. With golf, you're playing yourself very much. If you hit each ball perfectly, you're fine. It's when you don't quite do what you expected to do. There is wind and there is bumps in the course and stuff, but it's mainly you. So and with golf, probably like chess, you have to maintain that peak concentration for such a long period of time. With golf, they walk around the course. It could take them 4 or 5 hours to play around, and then they've got to do the same again the next day, and the next day, and the next day. It's an extraordinary sport in terms of the pleasures, the joys, and the penalties, relying on each single movement. It's really quite amazing.
That's a lot. We had on the show here a fellow named John Lee Dumas, who he has a website called Entrepreneur on Fire, and he said something which I really like, and I've taken it, and it reminds me of what you're saying. I'll leave off with this. He said, when you're working in such a situation, you have to have a huge amount of focus. And he said, focus is an acronym for follow one course until success. I think that's a great line. Phil Parker, we are just about out of time. Tell me in the last few seconds, how can people follow your work and learn more about you?
Best way to find me is on the internet, philparker.org, or look for me on iTunes. I've got lots of podcasts and products on iTunes. Obviously Amazon as well, Twitter, Facebook. But yeah, hang out with me. I'm very much available to answer people's questions and help people get extraordinary lives, because that's probably the most important thing anyone can do.
Sounds great. Phil Parker, thanks so much for your time.
Great to speak to you, Doug. You take care.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt show with international investment expert Doug Goldstein. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, go to www.goldsteinongelt.com or write to Doug directly at doug@profile-financial.com.